Welcome to real and deep love stories where every heartbeat tells a truth words can barely hold. Here, love isn't fantasy, it's real, raw, and beautifully imperfect. From unspoken connections that begin with a single glance, to the weight of boundaries that test the courage of the heart, to moments of truth where feelings break through silence, and finally, to love beyond power where hearts surrender not for victory, but for peace. Every story you'll hear here is told in a voice that feels like your own, emotional, honest, and deeply human. So close your eyes, listen, and let your heart travel through stories that remind you true love still exists, even when the world says it shouldn't. The days always began the same way: the hum of computers, the faint aroma of coffee drifting through the office, the soft sound of pages turning, keyboards clicking, people pretending not to notice one another. Everything in that place had a rhythm, familiar and predictable, until one glance shifted everything. It wasn't planned. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. Yet, something in the air changed. A quiet spark, the kind that makes time hesitate before moving again. It started with silence, not the awkward kind, but the kind that speaks louder than words. Every conversation seemed to hold something beneath it, a weight that neither could name. Work gave the perfect excuse: reports, meetings, shared deadlines, reasons to speak when there shouldn't have been any. Eyes met across the room, long enough to feel something stir, short enough to pretend it didn't happen. There was warmth in the way small things began to matter: a polite good morning, said softer than usual, a lingering pause when handing over a file, a glance caught through glass walls that lasted half a heartbeat too long. Each moment left something behind, invisible yet impossible to ignore. It wasn't desire, it was recognition, the quiet knowing that someone finally saw something others didn't bother to look for. The connection grew in the spaces between words. During late evenings when most had gone home, when only the ticking of the clock and the hum of the air conditioner filled the room, there would be conversations that felt too easy, too honest. Talk about life outside the office, about dreams once forgotten, about the small things that make people who they are. The kind of talk that feels safe and dangerous all at once. There were days when the heart wanted to run ahead, but the mind stayed behind, holding it still. The difference in position, in power, in what the world would say, it hung between them like glass, clear but unbreakable. There was respect there, and fear too. Fear of losing what little they already had, the silent bond that didn't need to be spoken to be real. Every time their paths crossed, something softened inside. The smallest gestures began to hold meaning. A smile shared in passing became a secret. The brushing of hands when exchanging documents became a memory replayed too often. And yet nothing was ever said, because saying it would make it real, and real meant risk. The heart learned the language of restraint. It learned to love through stillness, to feel through distance, to find comfort in knowing someone was near, even if nothing could be claimed. There was beauty in that quiet ache, in the way love stayed hidden, unspoiled by words or promises. It grew quietly, like roots beneath the ground, unseen but unshakable. There were moments that tested the silence, days when laughter felt too warm, or when eyes met for too long and neither looked away. The air would thicken with what could never be said, and still the world went on. Meetings happened, deadlines were met. Life remained ordinary on the outside, but beneath that calm surface, something rare was unfolding, something both fragile and fierce. What made it real wasn't what was done, but what was felt. The kind of connection that didn't need to be touched to be known. The kind of love that didn't rush to declare itself, because it understood the sacredness of waiting. The feeling that someone else carried the same secret heartbeat, the same unspoken understanding. It was enough, and yet never enough. There were evenings when the office lights dimmed and only two remained, each pretending to focus on work, each aware of the other's presence like gravity. The silence would grow heavier, filled with everything unsaid. Sometimes one would speak about something ordinary, but the tone, the eyes, said everything else. It was as if two souls were trying to find a way to exist within the limits of the world they'd been given. What no one saw were the small moments that made it all unbearable and beautiful. The way a name sounded when spoken softly, the way laughter could erase exhaustion, The way being seen, truly seen by another, could make a person feel both stronger and more vulnerable than ever before. It was love without declaration, desire without demand, closeness without possession. Some nights, when everything was quiet, the thought would come, what if the world were different? What if the lines didn't exist? But wishing was useless. Life doesn't bend for the heart's convenience. So the feeling stayed unspoken, folded neatly inside, carried quietly through days that looked like every other. And yet, even in silence, love found a way to breathe. In the way eyes searched for each other in a crowded room. In the way the smallest kindness felt like a promise. In the way both learned that sometimes the deepest connections are the ones that never needed to be confessed. Love in its truest form isn't always loud. Sometimes it hides in the pauses, lives in the glances, and survives in the spaces where words never dare to go. Because some hearts don't need to say it to mean it, they just know. There comes a moment when love stops feeling like a gift and begins to feel like a choice, a quiet, dangerous one that must be made again and again in silence. It happens slowly, almost invisibly, hidden beneath routine and rules. The kind of love that wasn't supposed to exist began to take shape in stolen moments, guarded smiles, and the delicate tension of two people who understood too well the cost of being honest. There were boundaries everywhere, written and unwritten. Titles, responsibilities, expectations. The world outside demanded distance, demanded control, demanded that nothing personal ever cross into professional space. But the heart doesn't follow office policy. It doesn't understand hierarchy or timing. It only recognizes truth when it sees it, and once it does, there is no forgetting. Each day became a quiet act of balance, meetings where eyes couldn't linger too long. Conversations where words were chosen carefully, stripped of feeling, polished until they sounded like nothing but work. But beneath that calm surface lived a quiet storm, something alive, pulsing between the lines of everything unsaid. It wasn't about wanting what couldn't be had. It was about feeling something so real, so alive, that it demanded to exist even in silence. The distance was necessary, but it was also cruel. It made every encounter both gift and punishment. The world demanded restraint, and yet the heart kept breaking its own rules in small, invisible ways, in the warmth of a shared glance, in the comfort of a familiar voice, in the way the simplest words could carry too much meaning. Some days it felt like walking on glass, every step measured, careful, afraid of what one wrong move could shatter. It wasn't fear of scandal or whispers. It was the fear of losing what already existed. The quiet bond that had formed in trust and respect, that delicate understanding that needed no confession to be known. Crossing the line meant risking not just a career or reputation, it meant risking the one place where the soul felt safe. There were moments when being near felt unbearable, when a smile could undo an entire day of self-control, when laughter shared in a hallway could echo for hours after, stirring something that had been carefully buried. There was always that invisible thread pulling tighter, daring to break the space between what was allowed and what was wanted. Every heartbeat carried a quiet battle, the desire to speak and the need to remain silent. It became an art, loving within limits, learning how to care deeply without showing it, how to miss someone who was never truly yours, how to find meaning in what could never be claimed. The world saw professionalism. Inside was devotion, steady and hidden. And yet, in that silence, love grew stronger. It didn't fade under pressure, it deepened. Maybe because it had to survive without words. Maybe because it had to exist in the quiet spaces between meetings and parting glances. Every restraint became proof of how much it mattered. The discipline to stay within boundaries wasn't absence of feeling. It was love choosing to protect itself from destruction. There were evenings when both stayed late, each pretending it was for work. The air between them heavy, filled with the things they could never say. Sometimes a question hung there: what if the lines weren't there? What if the world allowed this? But questions like that were dangerous. They opened doors that had to stay closed. So instead, they spoke of ordinary things, using safe words to hide the ones that would ruin everything. The hardest part wasn't pretending, it was knowing. Knowing that this connection would never fit into any definition others would understand. Knowing that what felt pure and real would look like betrayal to those outside. Knowing that even honesty could destroy something beautiful. So silence became both shield and prison. Over time, the heart learned to live with it, to take what moments it could, to find beauty in restraint. There was something sacred in that control, something almost noble in loving without possession. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about holding space for something too fragile to survive the world's judgment. Sometimes love isn't meant to be loud or public. Sometimes it's meant to stay hidden, not because it's shameful, but because it's sacred. There's a kind of devotion that thrives not in the light, but in the quiet shadows of understanding, where words are too small for what the heart already knows. Each day began and ended with the same quiet truth: love was there, unspoken but undeniable. The weight of boundaries didn't kill it, it shaped it, made it wiser, gentler, more patient. It taught that love doesn't always demand fulfillment. Sometimes it asks for endurance. Sometimes it asks to be felt fully and still held quietly, for the sake of something greater than desire. And maybe that's what real love is: not the breaking of rules, but the honoring of them, even when it hurts. Choosing to stay, choosing silence, choosing to protect what can't be owned. Because some loves aren't meant to be shouted to the world. They're meant to be carried softly, like a secret the heart keeps for life. And in that silence, love finds its truest voice. There are moments in life when silence becomes heavier than truth, when holding back no longer feels like strength, but a slow kind of breaking. The heart, so long disciplined by fear and boundaries, begins to tremble under the weight of what it has carried too quietly. It had been building for months, that quiet storm between two people who spoke carefully, looked cautiously, lived as though every glance could be a confession. But truth has a way of finding its voice, even when every rule says it shouldn't. It happened on an ordinary day. There was nothing special about it: the same walls, the same routine, the same cautious distance. Yet something in the air felt different, as though both hearts had finally grown tired of pretending. There was no plan, no courage rehearsed, only a moment when everything that had been hidden refused to stay silent any longer. The conversation began like any other: work, deadlines, the comfort of familiar topics that kept emotions neatly tucked away. But there was a pause, a silence that stretched too long to be casual. Eyes met, and in that stillness, something unspoken passed between them. A knowing, a surrender, a truth that neither could contain anymore. The words came softly, almost afraid of themselves. There was no declaration, no dramatic confession, just a quiet honesty that broke the tension of months spent in restraint. Simple words, but spoken with the weight of everything that had been felt in secret. The kind of words that change the air, that make the world outside fall away until only two souls remain. For a heartbeat, time stood still. There was no office, no world, no rules. Just the raw, unfiltered truth of what had always been their love, pure and undeniable. It wasn't loud or reckless. It was gentle, steady, as though both already knew this moment was inevitable. The fear came next, not of being wrong, but of what honesty would cost. The realization that speaking the truth meant crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. And yet, it didn't feel wrong. It felt like breathing after holding breath for too long. Like finally stepping out of the shadows into light, even if that light burned a little. There was no joy in that confession, only release, no celebration, only quiet understanding. What was said didn't need to be explained. It had already been known in every shared glance, every stolen moment of silence. It was love stripped of all pretense, of all caution, something too sincere to deny any longer. In that moment, the world felt impossibly fragile. Every sound outside seemed distant, every thought faded except one: that love, no matter how complicated, had chosen honesty over fear. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't impulse. It was truth demanding to be seen, no longer willing to live in the shadows. There was a kind of peace in it, not the kind that comes from certainty, but the kind that comes from finally aligning with one's own heart. The fear of consequences still lingered, but so did something stronger, the quiet pride of having chosen truth, even when silence would have been easier. After that day, everything looked the same, yet nothing was. The world went on as it always had, but between them, something had changed. Every look now carried history. Every word held layers that only they understood. Honesty had broken the stillness, and there was no way to return to the safety of before. What followed wasn't reckless or dramatic. It was quiet and deliberate, two people learning how to exist in the aftermath of truth. Every moment became a test of strength, to care deeply yet carefully, to love without destroying, to protect what had been revealed, not exploit it. Love, once spoken, demanded presence. It could no longer hide behind professionalism or fear. It asked for grace, for courage, for the patience to let things unfold without rushing into chaos. And somehow that made it even more real. Because it wasn't born from fantasy, it came from restraint, from honesty, from the simple act of telling the truth even when it hurt. There were days when it felt like too much, the weight of emotions too deep to manage, the uncertainty of what future could come of it. Yet there was never regret, because truth, once spoken, cannot be unlived. And even if it changed everything, it also brought something pure, a kind of freedom that only comes from finally being known. Love doesn't always need a promise. Sometimes it only needs a moment of truth. A single heartbeat of honesty that says, I see you, I feel this too, and that alone becomes enough to carry through the uncertainty that follows. For so long, silence had been safety, but honesty became salvation. It tore through the careful walls built to keep love contained and replaced them with something far more fragile, but far more real. In the end, it wasn't the words themselves that changed everything, but the courage it took to say them, to look into another's eyes and allow truth to live there without shame or fear. That's what love is, not perfection, not possession, but truth spoken softly between two hearts brave enough to listen. And from that moment on, nothing was hidden again. There comes a time when love stops asking for permission, when all the fears, the doubts, the whispers of what others might say, lose their power against the quiet certainty between two hearts. It had taken years of restraint, patience, and silence to reach that moment, years of loving through distance, of carrying feelings carefully, afraid of what honesty could destroy. But love that is real does not vanish under pressure. It waits, it learns, it grows stronger in the shadows until one day it steps into the light, not to prove anything, but to live freely. The world called it many things: reckless, inappropriate, impossible. The difference in status, in position, in what people thought was right, all stood like walls around them. But love has never been built for walls. It finds cracks, soft places, secret doors through which it breathes. What began as an unspoken connection, shaped by rules and restraint, became something neither of them could deny any longer. The weight of boundaries had done its part. It had taught respect, taught patience, taught that love is not taking, but choosing. And when the truth finally came out, it was not a rebellion. It was surrender. It didn't happen with grand gestures or confessions shouted in public. It was quiet, private, almost fragile, two people choosing each other despite knowing the world would never understand. There was no victory in it, no sense of winning against the odds. It was love stripped of pride, built only on trust. Trust that what they shared was worth every risk. Trust that respect would hold stronger than judgment. The day they married was not a story of defiance. It was one of peace. There were no crowds cheering, no cameras waiting to capture scandal. Only two souls standing side by side, aware of what they had lost and what they had chosen instead. It wasn't the kind of wedding found in stories or films. It was quiet, sacred, a moment where the heart finally stopped running from itself. In that stillness, everything became clear. Love was not about power, not about who led, who followed, who risked more. It was about equality, about the courage to stand in front of another person with nothing to hide. No masks, no distance, no pretending that life would be easy. It was a promise to keep choosing, even when the world looked away in disapproval. The early days were hard, whispers followed them. Some called it ambition disguised as affection, others called it foolishness. Every word carried the sting of judgment, but love has a way of finding strength in stillness. The noise outside never mattered as much as the quiet inside the peace that came from knowing that the decision had been right. What existed between them was not scandal, it was sincerity. In that new life together, there were no roles of authority or submission. Power faded, replaced by gentleness. The same person who once gave commands in an office now listened at a kitchen table, learning the language of understanding, not leadership. What had once been formal and restrained became something deeply human: shared laughter, honest conversations, long silences that no longer hurt. Marriage didn't make love easier, it made it truer. It exposed every fear, every vulnerability, every insecurity. But in those moments of rawness, love found its depth. It wasn't about control anymore. It was about care, about knowing when to speak and when to simply hold space for the other. About realizing that the strength of love lies not in possession, but in presence. There were days when the past echoed too loudly, days when memories of boundaries and judgment made the present feel heavy. But love endured. It learned to forgive the world for its harshness, and itself for the silence it once kept. It learned that surrender is not weakness, it is grace, the grace to love without justification, to stay even when it's difficult, to keep believing even when the world refuses to understand. There was beauty in the ordinary moments: the morning coffees, the shared glances over small mistakes, the laughter that returned after days of exhaustion. It wasn't perfection, it was real. Every flaw, every disagreement, every soft reconciliation was proof that love had matured beyond illusion. The connection that once lived in secrecy now lived in daylight, not as rebellion but as acceptance. With time, the world quieted. The same people who once doubted began to see something unshakable: not passion built on impulse, but commitment built on truth. Because when love is real, it doesn't need to shout. It endures, it softens, it heals. The journey from silence to surrender taught that love is not a prize to win or a scandal to hide. It is a choice made over and over with tenderness and courage. To love beyond power is to love without fear, to step away from pride and into humility, to let the heart guide where logic once ruled. And in the end, that's what it became: not a story of conquest, but of quiet bravery. A life built not on control, but on compassion. A union not defined by what others thought, but by what was real between them. Because sometimes love's greatest strength lies not in defiance, but in surrender. If this story touched your heart, don't let it fade here. Subscribe now to real and deep love stories, where every tale reveals a piece of the love we all search for. Like, share, and comment your thoughts, because every heart has a story worth telling. Join this journey of connection, courage, and quiet devotion. Until next time, keep believing in love that's real, not perfect, but true, and remember, sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones whispered in silence.